everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for this session. For this session, we're going to discuss the Founder's Guide to setting up a good data analytics foundation. It will work for AI, data science, and business intelligence. So even if you're not thinking about setting up your own business right now, you may decide to do that in the future. So with that in mind, we're going to look at some really helpful business-oriented advice in order to help you and your organization to be successful with your data. So to introduce myself, my name is Jen Stirrup. I'm the founder of Data Relish Limited. I'm a #1 best-selling Amazon author in organizational management and change. I'm also a recognized leader in AI, data science, and business intelligence. And it's my pleasure to be here with you today. So a few takeaways from this session. First of all, we're going to look at what it means to build a solid data foundation. What is that? What does it look like? And then as part of that, I'll give you some actionable advice on understanding the data you have and understanding the data that you need as well. We'll also look at the building blocks of a data foundation if you don't already have one in place. If you do have one in place, then we'll have a look at how we can make your data foundation stronger. Along the way, I'll also discuss ways we can solve problems and I'll give you advice and experience from sparks from the anvil, if you like, from someone, me, who's done this for a very long time. I've been in the data industry for 25 years this year, and I'm very proud to still be here after all this time, and thank you very much for having me. So what is it we're trying to achieve at this point here? Well, what we are trying to look at is different ways that we can have a really solid data foundation that supports a business environment. The thing is, when we start to build a data foundation, sometimes people get very hung up in the technology and they don't really think very much about the why of what they're doing. They get very bogged down in the what and the how, but not as bogged down in the more important things in some ways, the why. And know that it's a really interesting thing to get very stuck in the technology, and sometimes it can make people feel superior, and that's not a good thing. We don't want to exclude anybody from making the most of their data. So what are we trying to achieve? Well, we want to make our organizations have successful decision-making capabilities, regardless of whether they are a small organization or a large organization. Now, when we look at phenomena such as augmented intelligence, what it does is it combines the power of AI with human judgment, and it really is based on a data foundation. Machine intelligence, machine learning, is more statistically minded. It's not as inspired by human ways of thinking. It's more statistical in nature. It's all about reducing a search space to get the results you're looking for. Again, machine intelligence is based on a data foundation. Business intelligence describes your business, how many sales you made, your top 5 customers, the average number of employees you have, and what your growth is going to look like. It's also based on a solid data foundation. Fundamentally, efforts to change and optimize the organization using strategies involving digital transformation, they're also based on a data foundation as well. So to summarize, without a proper solid foundation as part of a holistic business and data approach, organizations are going to really struggle to train machines to deliver trustworthy insights, insightful recommendations, and to help the organization to really make their data work. So we don't always know in some ways what it is we're trying to achieve. but fundamentally, it's such an important question. So it's easy to get hung up in the technology, but not the why we are doing this. You could be doing completely the wrong thing. So the data foundation is really critical as a basis for all types of reporting and analytics. And if you want to do more fancy things as well, then it's also important to know what that looks like and based on a good data foundation. If people don't trust the data, they won't trust what you're telling them. And the thing is that users particularly think it should be easy. We've become very spoiled when we do a Google search result. We get billions of search results in sub-seconds times. Business people expect the same service, and they don't always get it from IT departments. So what we're trying to do is get everyone together in the organisation to build a really solid data foundation. And what does that solid, sound, data, intelligent data foundation look like? Well, what we're trying to do is think about data leading to wisdom. It's not just enough to think about data in terms of salient data points and ignoring the rest. Those might be interesting, but they might not be telling you exactly what you need to know about the business. So there's a range of things that it can give you. So let's have a look at those. One thing that's important is data leading to wisdom. As I've just mentioned, we're trying to make wiser, longer-term decisions about the organisation, as well as short-term operational ones. So it's important to understand exactly what the audience is looking for and who the audience actually is. So when we're talking about wisdom, what I really mean is that longer-term, more strategic thinking in the organisation. Something I do see people do is find one interesting fact. It makes them feel good about themselves because no one else knows that fact. So it means that they can be hanging everything off one salient data point and ignoring everything else. That means they are looking at a tree rather than the whole forest. And ideally, you want to be looking at both. We also want to think about continually transforming and optimizing the organisation. There's so many opportunities to do that in any organisation. For example, you may want to think about AI ops. AI ops is a ways in which we can take our artificial intelligence models, deploy them into production, but it's really a process where we try and get everyone to talk to one another. It's harder than it sounds very often, and trying to encourage people to work together so everyone is involved. So when we think about continuous transformation, what we're thinking about is continually looking for opportunities to optimize. People talk about digital transformation as if it has an end. I don't believe it does. Businesses often live in environments which are very fluid and very dynamic. So that doesn't always mean that we are able to change things as quickly as we like. We should not always think that there's an end goal in mind. That's why the agile methodology works really well. It's allowing people to be fluid and responsive to changes in the organisation. We can also think about a data strategy as well. Now, we often think about business strategies as helping to lift the vision of the organisation and move everyone in that direction and hopefully point them towards success for everyone. A data strategy should support the business strategy. And what that's doing is looking at where the business would like to be with their data and helping them to get there. Now, sometimes that can involve picking the best technologies or doing a beauty parade of those technologies. What that means as well, we have insights, actions, and ethics around that. How can we be very mindful of the ethics of what people are doing with the data? And that can be something very simple. For example, not sharing data which should not be shared, particularly if it's user data or customer data. But it can also be part of the start of a project as well. And that's where we're not just thinking about what will this project deliver for the organisation, we're also asking ourselves, what harm will it do? So it's not just about the costs that are saved or the profit that will be made. We are casting it in terms of what are the consequences of this for the people involved. So when we think about a data strategy, what we're trying to do is assess where the organisation is in terms of its maturity, and then try and find actionable points where we can take those away and try to do something that will lift the organisation to a more mature state with the data. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that large organisations have got it nailed and smaller organisations have not. In my experience, I found that large organisations often have legacy systems. They also have heritage systems that they may not want to switch off. Quite often I see organisations like that which have got duplicate systems where they built one system to replace another system. They didn't switch the first system off, so they end up with two systems and they end up duplicating both. So the problem with that is that you don't really have a version of the truth, and worse, you've actually got duplicate data all over the place and you don't know which one is the right one. The problem with duplicate data is, as an aside, is it also takes up more storage than you might want it to. And it also means that technology such as Tableau or Microsoft's Power BI will take longer to find the data that they need because they've got more data to traverse. So we're trying to be very honest about where we are in terms of duplicate, missing data, and also shadow data as well. We often talk about shadow IT systems, the technology people are using, which nobody knows they're using. And sometimes you can end up with shadow help desks, people asking their friends or their colleagues for help rather than logging support tickets. So it's quite hard to know what's going on. So we also see shadow data systems as well. Those are the little data sources where people are hiding Excel workbooks, perhaps in their email or on their hard drive or on OneDrive, which is a cloud store where no one else can get to them. And the problem with that is the data strategy. We need to uncover those in order to make a difference to the organisation. If IT doesn't know about these data assets, then it can't look after them, it can't govern them, can't make sure that they don't leave the building, for example. So, and sometimes I did read a case recently in the ICO where someone left an organisation and they actually sold some of the data to a company that their boyfriend worked for. And it's one of the few times where a prison sentence has been involved in anything to do with data. And that happened last year. So we need to be careful what people are doing with their data. We can also think about productivity as well. So productivity really means where we're trying to find raw data, turn that into wisdom, and we're trying to get there as quickly as we can, more or less in a straight line. Now, we all know that isn't what happens, but we're trying to find good ways of growing the data in the organisation, so overall we have got better strategies. I don't know about you, but I hate not being able to find a data store and not find what I need very, very quickly. So with productivity, we're trying to find the data that they need at the point at which they need it. Now, I did work with one organisation where I saved the organisation 4 days a week of someone's work and reduced it down to less than an hour, simply because I set up an extract, transform and load data pipeline to move data around, do some reconciliation, then pop the data where it needed to go. And all the team member needed to do was double check the reconciliation and that would be fine. So that's quite a big change because you really help somebody to become more productive and more effective, doing something that makes more of their human-centered skills rather than simply bodging data around, which we do see sometimes. And it's not good when that happens. You see people just taking data sources and trying to jam them together in Excel, and there's a lot of that going on. But that really means that the data is not matching a process and the process is not matching the data. So we need to try and understand and unpick all of that. So you can actually try to measure productivity, and you can do that in terms of price tags, trying to work out salaries and hours and that kind of thing, and work it out as days saved across the month, for example. So when you start to do that, people start to get a bit surprised at the amount of time that they're losing. So productivity is one of the hidden challenges. Humans are so creative and adaptable that if they come across a challenge, they tend to work a way around it. And that's fine, but that can mean that the workaround becomes the process, and that's not good either. We're also thinking about consistency. Sometimes I go into organisations and their reports all give me different numbers. And the reason for that is often they can be filtered differently, but it's not always clear that the reports have been filtered differently across the organisation. It means that people don't trust any of the reports because they don't know which reports to trust because they all say different things. And when that happens, they don't trust any of them. So that inconsistency leads to a fundamental lack of trust in the data foundation. In order to get trust, you really have to earn it by having consistent results that people can track back and they can understand the filtering and what's happening. And it's so important to double check that. We can also think about a competitive advantage as well. The nice thing about a competitive advantage is that obviously it's the advantage of your competitors, but it means that you can actually work out what the competitor is doing and you can think about what data the competitor is collecting. That will tell you something about their internal processes. So with that in mind, I suggest you have a look at your competitor's website, see what data they're collecting, and you can do a gap analysis really between what they collect and what you collect. If you're not doing this already as part of your organisation, you can probably guess that your competitors are already doing this about you, so it's probably worth bearing that in mind. So what do the symptoms of a problematic data foundation look like? Well, it means really we have multiple answers to the same questions. We make less than optimal business decisions because we didn't have the data, didn't have it at hand, couldn't find it, the data was wrong, all sorts of things. It also means lots of wasted time trying to retrieve the data that you're looking for. And basically, a problematic data foundation is the sum of all the suboptimal business and data decisions, and the result is due to incorrect data and incorrect information. So what are the risks of a data foundation that isn't solid? We have increased risk, and that risk could be financial, legal, and reputational. Say, for example, you have a data breach. I did see one organisation who had a really bad data breach. And it took 4 months to get their business up and running again the way that it should have been working. And that was the result of a serious cyber attack, which infected and impacted some very critical and crucial business systems. So the risks are enormous, not just reputational, but potentially the risks could be legal and financial as well. So a problematic data foundation can also have reduced productivity as well. People can't find what they're looking for. So then they start hiving off data into Excel or Google Sheets and they start to play around with it in there. They can also have ineffective processes, so things just don't work well for the customer the way that the customer expects. You need to find the voice of the customer and what you are thinking about and how you're serving them. There's also a lack of confidence about the data because you get different answers to the same questions, and that means people don't have confidence and you haven't earned it. So one thing to think about is understanding the data that you actually have collected right now. So business data is all of the data and information related to that company. That's your sales data, your customer data, your contacts data, leads, that kind of thing. Even website traffic statistics. It includes everything from basic descriptive statistics through to advanced analytics. You could be making more data with your data and enriching it. Businesses truthfully accumulate a lot of data. CRM data, Google Analytics, social media data. The list goes on and on and on. So what kind of data actually constitutes business data? Well, you've got operational costs. You could have a strategic financial overview, employee data, and your marketing data, of course, and obviously your customer information as well. You could also have things like executive dashboards used in order to support and drive the business. You could also have information in your supply chain systems as well. And you could also have inventory data and warehouse data in there too. And you could also think about website traffic statistics. That's one that many organizations focus on. You could also look at things like campaign data as well. And if you use any third-party marketplace data, that may also be included as part of your business data survey as well. So think about doing a survey of the information that you use every day. You'll probably find there's ones in there which surprise you, and you probably find a lot of hidden shadow data systems as well. So try to understand the data that you've got. You can build a data dictionary. There's plenty of templates of those online where you're basically breaking down all the columns into what they mean and how they are made up. Very detailed, but very much well worth it. Because if you know the data, you know the business, you know the organization, it makes you incredibly useful and incredibly indispensable. And it's one reason that I've been successful in my career is because I have known the data. And it has made me more visible and more indispensable. So I strongly recommend if you don't have a background in data, you become that person that knows the data. It will make you so valuable in the organisation. You'll get to speak to key decision makers that you may not get access to otherwise. So understanding the data that we need, we have mentioned a few different types that you want, but we need to think about looking forward as well. So once we understand a good enough amount of data, what does it actually mean to understand the data that we need? Well, the data should be relevant to the overall vision of the organisation. Let me ask you a few questions. Let's say your employer asked you to get in touch with a list of top customers who regularly buy from the customer, who regularly buy from your company. How would you go about getting that list of top customers who regularly buy from your company? And what does regularly mean anyway? Once a month, once a year, once a week, every day? So we start to unpick some of that. Time is very important in business intelligence systems. How would you know if a specific marketing campaign was successful or not? What data are you tracking in order to find that out? The thing is, businesses often feel that something that's really insignificant one day could be a game changer the next day in terms of the data. So that's why I personally keep the definition of business data as wide-ranging as possible. That's all the information in digital documents relating to the operations of the organisation, and you have to look at it through different lenses as well. So what a marketing team might find useful would actually be really unhelpful, perhaps to, say, an operational team, or the accounts team, who don't really care about things like bounce rate, lead conversion, time spent on the page, number of visitors, so on and so forth, these types of metrics. So say, for example, you're a financial analyst. You may want to see things like productivity data, accounting information, tax, anything else that's really focused on the operations of the business. You may also want to look at things such as growth, for example, year-on-year sales, average monthly income, expenditures for the business. So business data is all there to help support the business vision overall. So understanding what you need is really answered by asking yourself really useful, but quite simple, but very insightful questions. Who is your top customers? What are they buying from you and why? You can start to try and work out why that is. So the building blocks of the data foundation are where we start to think about what data do we actually need? So if you're doing a lot of marketing, then you need to have a good list of those top customers and understanding better the marketing campaign as well. We also need to think about the sad path as well. We're very good as humans of thinking of the happy path. What happens when things go well? But what happens when they don't? That's where we need crisis management. And we need to think about a long-term response. What happens if we have that data breach? How does that impact our long-term planning? So there's all sorts of different ways that we can start to think about what the building blocks should start to look like. But we have to think about risk as well and how we can assess that and prioritize as well. So how do we make our business data foundation stronger? There's a few different ways that we can start to think about that. But it's probably good to get the basics in first. Are you backing up the data? You're only as good as your last restore. So if the restore is not happening, the backups aren't valid. So we need to think about, what does this actually mean for the organisation? What does risk look like and how we can mitigate against that? It's good always to have a baseline in order to show improvement. So if you are thinking about operational, how much uptime do you have? What service levels are you meeting? And if you're not meeting them, then why? It's also good to think about data integration as well. That's brilliant for things like customer data, for example, looking at that end-to-end process, where they come in from the website, where they get converted to a contact or even a lead, and your interactions with them after that. So that means you may have to integrate your website with a CRM system, for example. And if they're buying services from you, you need to think about the checkout as well, and then what you can do with that data. You can also make the data foundation stronger by looking at the problems horizontally across the business, not just vertically. When we think about data in an organization, we're very, very good at thinking about siloed vertical data, the sales data, the marketing data, the operational data, these kind of sources. But we need to think about the data horizontally as well. So if someone enters their details in your website, what does that actually mean? What happens to the data after that? When does the data start to get cleaned up if it's dirty? So do you have anything on the website that helps to correct that? Even address autofills? We can also look and see how the organisation handles issues in the data. So who's actually fixing those? Or is everyone just pointing fingers at one another to say that it's not their problem, it's caused by someone else? Another way to make the data solid and really reliable and also intelligent is to think about data quality as well. So that's important to business success, and we should try to make it so. What that means is that everyone is trying to bite off a little bit of that data debt. I talk about data debt sometimes, and that really means where the suboptimal decisions have meant that a piece of data is not being handled properly, and it tends to come back to bite people later. So we talk about technical debt, but I like to think about data debt as well. It's a bit like how do you eat an elephant, one part at a time? And it's the same with data quality. How do you solve the problem? One bit at a time. Often I go into organisations that have got no clue what the customer list looks like. I spoke to one organisation that simply didn't have a customer list that the marketing team could use because the IT team said it would take time to do, and they didn't have it signed in or penciled in as a project. I dealt with that organisation back and forth for months, and they were always told the same thing. Basically, IT didn't want to talk to marketing, marketing didn't want to talk to IT. So in the end, marketing actually went out and bought a stock database. They said, we don't have our own customer data, but we have to prove that we're doing something. So we're going to buy mailing lists. And they went off and bought 2 very clean mailing lists, and they used those. They were just so happy to have a clean, robust data source that the marketing team could use in order to support the business and show their value. And they said to me, it's not customer data, it's not our customer data, but it's still customer data, and we can track it and see the value of that. So that really touches on another important point, which is data lineage and auditing. Where is the data coming from? If you are not able to track the data back, and maybe it's come from, say, a third party, then I strongly recommend you check your licensing with the third party, because it may be that you're not using the licensing properly. So that's always a risk as well. We want to understand where the data goes as well. We don't want people downloading it and then posting it somewhere. We also want to build a strong data foundation and using the cloud as well. Using the cloud means that you're more than just simply storing data in the cloud. You're using cloud services, and those cloud services could be things like, there's plenty of examples in AWS, for example, ways of storing the data in there. So when we look at those data stores, what we're trying to do is put the data in the data store, and then we can try to optimize that data using various cloud services to help us to understand that. So for example, if you are collecting data from edge sensors, you could use that technology and store the data and then analyze it further. But that's really all about leveraging the cloud in order to become more nimble when you're working towards having a more solid data foundation and perhaps going through a data strategy as well. So there's plenty of things you can do. Just to summarize, you can baseline to show improvement. You can also integrate the data as well. I wouldn't necessarily say that just having one huge data store is always the right thing. It can depend on the organization. What I would say is, rather than worrying about should we just have one data store, perhaps think about having the right data store for the right data. Sometimes I see people put data into the cloud, they're not actually using it very much. So it's more about the right data rather than having one version of the truth. Because the thing is, the version of the truth will vary from person to person. So a marketing view of customers might be different from a sales view, might be different from an operational view. But what you want underneath all of that is a good, strong, solid data foundation that you can use as a good platform for moving the data around and getting it to the people that really want to see it and to be able to see that in the dashboards. We also want to think about governance in order to reduce risk, and also think horizontally across the organisation, see what problems you can collaborate with other teams on, rather than pointing fingers at one another. And remember, leveraging the cloud as well is also a good idea. Get storing the data in the cloud, but also leveraging the services in the cloud too. We need to think about the risks to the organisation and preparing for those emergencies too. So data breaches, a loss of data, these kind of things are really important. So we try and mitigate them and then manage our way through them with a process. Practicing is good as well. So if you haven't practiced restoring a database recently, I recommend you do that. You'd be surprised how many people focus on backing up, but they don't focus on restoring. So we can think about governance and data ops as well. Data ops is about getting data assets and data products out to people in as streamlined a way as possible. It allows the organisation to think about how people can work together, so it's more of a process than actually technology, although you may see data ops coming up as a product's name. It's actually more of a process where we're trying to get everyone to move together and work together in a very aligned way to get data products out and accurately presented to people as quickly as possible. So with that in mind, you can start to think about any potential issues that you might uncover and how you use the technology to overcome those. So with that in mind, you have to think about, do you have a crisis response plan with your data? So again, having a baseline of what good should look like is a good way. Where are you now? Do check-ins, data integration. What data has been moved where? How are you integrating that? What do the keys look like, for example? And thinking horizontally across the organisation and thinking about data quality as well. How much missing data do you have? Can people go back through and repopulate that? I did see a system recently where a data import had not gone well and people were trying to fix that. So the issue there is if the data has not been imported into the right places, how do you undo that if you need to redo it again? So having a good look at the mappings will hopefully avert the crisis. It can be quite stressful trying to work with all of that. So I would say that communication is really important. Every Friday in one organisation I worked at, we used to send out a newsletter to the team. What we did was we put it on a wiki, basically, and everybody could look at the wiki and see what we've been up to. We would take a team photograph and post that up as well, and that was quite fun. And we tried to have as open a dialogue as possible, and that looked at things like working practices and how people could work best with one another. Some people are quite introverted and want to just use email. Other people want to use Slack and chat back and forth. So people can have very different communication styles as well. But trying to work out the best pattern for different people is really helpful in trying to maintain a good practice where people are collaborating, because collaboration and sharing of information and knowledge and expertise is such an important way of trying to help build the solid data foundation. If you don't have the data foundation in place, then that can impact the people working in the organisation and it can cause great tension. One organisation I worked at, the head of IT would come in the room and the head of business intelligence would leave. And you had this, you couldn't get them both in the same meeting because they could not stand one another, basically, because they'd been arguing for years over data. But they couldn't see each other's point of views. So I didn't solve that problem. I did get them to talk to one another a little bit. They did actually sit in a meeting once, which was an achievement, trust me. Bless. But what I did find was I could try and go back and forth and be a bit of a conduit to say, well, have you looked at it this point of view? Have you looked at it that point of view? And then we started to see some movement there. And so the point being that constant and consistent communication to people is the ideal, but very often we don't see that because data can be such a political and contentious subject in many organisations, particularly if people are not getting the data that they need and when they need it. So just a quick summary. We really do need a good solid data foundation when we are working in organisations, and that's regardless of your size, small or large. Large organisations tend to have a lot of legacy systems out there, so they don't always have a good relationship with their data. But what we're trying to do is help them to have that good solid foundation. It forms the basis for AI, for business intelligence, for data science, for machine learning, for digital and continuous transformations. So having a solid data foundation will help empower your organisation to get further in the various initiatives that it's doing. We can also plan for different situations as well. What happens when this system goes down or that system goes down? We can also think about communication. I mentioned some problems with that earlier. It seems like a perennial problem, as I said earlier. I've been in IT as moving on from a graduate for 25 years this year. I've been coding since I was 8, which means I've actually been coding for 40 years this year. And I think I've been very blessed to have that as a hobby and as a job. And now I mainly mentor other people through coding, that kind of thing. And it's great to see other people empowered with it. But I think if you understand data, it helps so many other things as well. It's such a foundation for your career. Yeah, having a good solid data foundation is a great foundation for your career and the business. So about being proactive rather than reactive, it means that you can try to see if there's any issues coming down the pipe and try to avert crises where possible. So hopefully that helps a little bit. You can see there's all sorts of different ways that we can start to think about having a good solid foundation, but it really starts with individuals and it really starts with us. We looked at how we can understand the data that you have. I would give it a very wide definition and understand the data that you need. What questions do people have that are not being answered by the data right now? That's the data you need. Sometimes people don't know what they don't know. They don't know what questions they would like to answer. So sometimes give them something as a prototype, play around with it, see what they say. They will find that so much easier to use that as a way of formulating questions and things they're interested in. Just give them something to start with, and then that should hopefully start to facilitate and promote some thought. We also thought about the building blocks of the data foundation. If the data in the organisation is in a better shape, people tend to be a bit happier as well because you're not frustrated staring at spreadsheets, for example, a lot. Also means people are more likely to collaborate and share information, and that's such a crucial point. People can ruin each other's careers by not sharing things and withholding key information from people, and it's not fair, and you don't want to be that person. It's easy to buy the latest and greatest technology but not know what to do with it or what the purpose is. So it's often coming back to that business vision, that why of what people are doing. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for attending the session today. And if you have any questions, you've got my email address there, email hello@data-relish.com. I'm also around on LinkedIn, spend far too much time on Twitter. And I want to say thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it useful. And I wish you all the best as you go and build a solid data foundation in your organisations.